What would you do if everything you built, your family, your home, your legacy, was betrayed by the one you trusted most? In this powerful tale of loss, resilience, and redemption, Margaret Belmont leaves behind more than just her beloved garden and sprawling estate. She leaves a plan that will force her husband, Henry, to confront his past mistakes and decide who he truly wants to become. As the roses in Margaret's garden bloom, so too do the lives of the women touched by her vision. But not everyone is ready to embrace change. Henry's battle with guilt, ambition, and his own stubborn pride threatens to derail everything Margaret worked for. Add in the intrigue of a hidden letter, a decades-old betrayal, and a foundation that could change lives or collapse, and you have a story that will keep you guessing until the very last word. What secrets did Margaret uncover before her death? Can Henry rise to the occasion, or will he let the legacy crumble under the weight of his past? Stay tuned to find out, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us it's never too late for a second chance. Let us know in the comments. What would you do if someone gave you the tools to rebuild not just your life, but your soul? Now, let's dive into the story of Margaret Belmont's legacy, a tale of betrayal, redemption, and the enduring power of hope. The rain began early that morning, a steady drizzle that turned the cobblestone streets of Savannah into glistening mirrors. Inside St. Augustine Chapel, the somber light filtering through the stained glass windows gave the space a reverent glow. The air was heavy, not only with the scent of roses, Margaret Belmont's favorite flower, but with the weight of unspoken words and shared grief. Margaret's casket, polished mahogany with delicate silver handles, rested at the altar, surrounded by a sea of white roses. Each bloom was a tribute from someone whose life she had touched. Neighbors she had helped during hard times, friends she had supported in moments of crisis, and staff she had treated not as employees, but as family. The pews were packed with mourners, their faces etched with sorrow. Quiet whispers floated through the air as they shared memories of Margaret's kindness and grace. "She always remembered my name," one woman murmured to her husband. "And mine," he replied, "even when we only met her once at the charity gala." But not everyone in the chapel was consumed by grief. At the very back, seated apart from the crowd, Henry Belmont, Margaret's husband of 40 years, sat with his head bowed, not in mourning, but in distraction. The soft glow of his phone illuminated his face as his fingers moved quickly across the screen. "Still on for tonight? Read the message." Henry's lips curled into the faintest smile. He tapped out a reply. "Of course." His attention flickered to the time on his phone. The service hadn't started yet, and he glanced toward the chapel doors with impatience. A shift in the murmurs drew his gaze as the large oak doors creaked open. Emily Harper entered, her black dress tailored to perfection, every line of fabric sculpted to highlight her figure. She walked with an air of confidence, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Her long auburn hair was swept into a loose bun, and her makeup was understated but flawless. But it wasn't her appearance that caused the whispers to rise to a crescendo. It was the brooch pinned to her dress, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, unmistakably the one Margaret had worn to every formal event for decades. The rain began in the early hours, light at first but persistent, turning Savannah's cobblestone streets into gleaming pathways. By the time mourners began arriving at St. Augustine Chapel, a gray mist hung in the air, softening the edges of the wrought iron gates and marble steps. Inside, the chapel was hushed. Stained glass windows filtered the morning light into patches of blue, gold, and red that danced across the wooden pews. Margaret Belmont's casket lay at the front, surrounded by a crown of white roses, her favorite flower. The roses weren't just beautiful. They were symbols of the love she had nurtured throughout her life, love that extended far beyond her family. Mourners filled the chapel, their faces somber as they exchanged quiet greetings. Among them were longtime staff from the Belmont mansion, members of Margaret's charity boards, and neighbors from the quiet Savannah neighborhood she had called home for decades. In the third pew sat Charlotte "Charlie" Graves, Margaret's assistant for over 30 years. Her presence was a silent tribute to the woman who had been her employer, mentor, and friend. Charlie clutched a neatly folded handkerchief in her lap, her hands trembling slightly. The weight of the day of the loss pressed heavily on her shoulders. Margaret had been a force of nature, a woman who could balance charity galas and board meetings while still finding time to plant roses in her garden. She had an eye for beauty and a heart for people. And now, as her casket rested in the chapel, the world felt dimmer. Not everyone in the chapel shared this sense of loss. At the very back, Henry Belmont slouched in the pew, scrolling through his phone. His perfectly tailored black suit hung on his frame with the precision of a man used to wealth and status. But his attention was not on the ceremony or even the mourners. Still on for tonight? Read the text on his screen. Henry smirked, typing a quick reply. Of course. Charlie, seated at the front, turned to glance at the congregation. Her gaze landed on Henry. She caught the faint glow of his phone, the way his shoulders shifted with impatience, and her chest tightened. The sound of the chapel doors creaking open pulled everyone's attention. A ripple of whispers began as Emily Harper stepped inside. Emily Harper had mastered the art of making an entrance. Her black dress clung to her slender frame, the fabric moving like water as she walked. Her heels clicked against the chapel's marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo louder than it should have in the quiet space. But it wasn't her dress or her striking auburn hair that caused the gasps. It was the brooch pinned just above her heart, a sapphire encircled by diamonds. Margaret's brooch. It was unmistakable. Margaret had worn it to every significant event in her life. Charlie had seen it sparkling at countless charity galas, pinned to Margaret's lapel as she charmed donors and dignitaries alike. Seeing it now, on Emily Harper, was a slap in the face to Margaret's memory. Charlie's fists tightened around her handkerchief. How dare she? Emily glided down the aisle, as if unaware of the murmurs. Her smile was soft but self-assured, the kind of smile that said she was used to turning heads. At the back of the chapel, she slid into the pew beside Henry. She leaned in, whispering something that made Henry's lips twitch into a smirk. Charlie felt her pulse quicken. This was supposed to be a day of mourning, a day to honor Margaret, but it was being overshadowed by this spectacle. After the service, the Belmont Mansion hosted a reception for family and close friends. The house, a sprawling Georgian estate with high ceilings and glittering chandeliers, felt colder without Margaret's presence. Charlie moved through the rooms like a ghost, her steps soft on the polished floors. The house that had once been filled with Margaret's warmth now seemed suffocating. In the study, a room that had been Margaret's sanctuary, Charlie found Emily. The younger woman was rifling through drawers, her movements deliberate but careless. Papers were scattered across the desk, and a jewelry box sat open, its contents spilled. "What are you doing?" Charlie asked, stepping into the room. Emily didn't flinch. She glanced over her shoulder, her smile faint. "Just organizing. Henry said I could use this room for my work." This was Margaret's office, Charlie said firmly. Emily shrugged, picking up a framed photo of Margaret and Henry from their younger days. Without hesitation, she tossed it into a box marked Donate. Charlie's breath caught. She rushed forward, rescuing the photo from the box. Her hands trembled as she brushed off the glass, her reflection mingling with Margaret's smiling face in the frame. "Some of this stuff is just clutter," Emily said dismissively. "It's time to make space for something new." Charlie's response was sharp. "Margaret cherished these things. You can't just throw them away." Emily's smile faded, replaced by a steely look. "It's not your decision." As Emily turned back to the desk, Charlie noticed something slip from behind the photo frame, a yellowed envelope with Margaret's elegant handwriting. "To be opened upon my death," it read. Charlie's heart pounded as she tucked the envelope into her pocket. Whatever it contained, Margaret had meant for it to be found. The following morning, the family lawyer, Ethan Ford, convened a reading of Margaret's will in the mansion's grand library. The room was packed with family, staff, and close associates, all waiting with a mix of anticipation and unease. Henry sat at the head of the long table, his confidence radiating. Emily hovered nearby, her hand resting on his shoulder like a claim. Ethan began with the formalities, outlining small bequests to charities and personal tokens to longtime friends. But the room grew tense as he reached the heart of the matter. To my husband, Henry Belmont, Ethan read, I leave only the opportunity to teach financial literacy at the Margaret Belmont Initiative for 1 year. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of all claims. The room erupted into murmurs. Emily's expression darkened. What does that mean? Ethan continued without pause. To my assistant, Charlotte Graves, I leave full authority to oversee the Margaret Belmont Initiative, along with Mr. Ford's guidance. Henry's face was a storm cloud as Ethan detailed the transfer of the Belmont mansion and the majority of Margaret's estate to the foundation. This is absurd, Henry roared, rising to his feet. Ethan remained calm. Margaret ensured every aspect of this was legally binding. You're free to challenge it, but you risk losing everything. Henry stormed out, Emily trailing behind him. Charlie sat quietly at the table, the envelope burning a hole in her pocket. Margaret's voice echoed in her mind. To be opened upon my death. Charlie retreated to her modest quarters in the Belmont Mansion's east wing, the envelope clutched tightly in her hand. The air in her room was cooler than usual, the rain outside tapping steadily against the windows as if echoing her trepidation. She sat at her small writing desk, the envelope resting before her like a relic of a time she wasn't sure she was ready to revisit. Margaret's elegant script stared back at her. To be opened upon my death. Charlie hesitated. She had seen Margaret through every major milestone in her life. From the grand opening of the Belmont Mansion to the quiet, personal struggles Margaret rarely allowed anyone else to witness. Whatever lay within this envelope was Margaret's final message, meant for someone she trusted implicitly. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single letter, its contents written in Margaret's familiar hand. Dear Charlie, if you're reading this, it means I am gone, and Henry has likely already begun dismantling what I worked so hard to protect. But my legacy is not the roses in the garden, the brooch on Emily's collar, or even this house. My legacy is the foundation we built together, and I need your help to ensure it thrives. Inside my personal safe, you will find everything you need, documents, account records, and a USB drive containing files I've been compiling for years. Henry will fight to regain control, but with these tools, you will have the upper hand. You were more than an assistant to me, Charlie. You were my confidant, my strength when I faltered, and my truest friend. I trust you to see this through. With love and gratitude, Margaret. Charlie's breath caught. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. There was no turning back now. The next morning, the tension in the mansion was palpable. Henry was pacing the library, his jaw tight as he barked orders into his phone. I don't care what the lawyers say, he shouted. There has to be a way to contest this will. Margaret didn't know what she was doing. Emily stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed. She was dressed impeccably, as always, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her frustration. Do you have a plan or not? She asked, her tone sharp. Henry shot her a glare. I'm working on it. As they argued, Charlie slipped into the room unnoticed. She had been tasked with bringing Henry's morning coffee, but she lingered near the door, listening. She made me look like a fool, Henry growled. Teaching classes? To whom? A bunch of old women who think they can start businesses? Emily smirked. It's insulting, really. But maybe if you humor them for a few weeks, we can figure out how to undo this mess. Charlie's grip on the tray tightened. Their disdain for Margaret's vision stung, but it also steeled her resolve. She set the coffee down with deliberate force, causing both Henry and Emily to turn. Your coffee, Mr. Belmont, she said, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. Henry's scowl deepened. Don't you have work to do, Charlie? Yes, she said, meeting his gaze. Important work. That evening, when the mansion was quiet, Charlie made her way to Margaret's study. She knew the combination to the safe. Margaret had shared it with her years ago, trusting her implicitly. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the Savannah River. Charlie removed the painting carefully, her heart pounding as she entered the combination. The door swung open, revealing a stack of documents and a small, unassuming USB drive. She gathered everything and returned to her quarters, locking the door behind her. Sitting at her desk, she began reviewing the documents. They detailed property transfers, offshore accounts, and years of financial records. Margaret had left nothing to chance. When Charlie plugged the USB drive in her laptop, the true scope of Margaret's planning became clear. The files contained recordings of Henry's private meetings, emails between him and Emily, and evidence of unethical business practices spanning decades. Margaret had been building her case for years. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to the mansion, David Belmont, Margaret and Henry's estranged son. David had always been the black sheep of the family. Where Henry valued power and prestige, David had chosen a different path, working as a doctor in underserved communities. His relationship with his father had been strained for years, but he had returned to pay his respects to his mother. "David," Charlie said, greeting him at the door. "It's good to see you." He smiled warmly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "It's good to see you too, Charlie. How are things here?" Charlie hesitated. "Complicated." As David stepped inside, he was immediately struck by the tension in the house. Henry was seated in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, while Emily hovered nearby. David's expression hardened. "I see nothing's changed." Henry looked up, his eyes narrowing. "David, finally decided to show your face." "I'm here for Mom," David said simply. "Not for me, of course," Henry muttered, taking another sip. David ignored him, turning to Charlie. "Tell me what I can do to help." Charlie and David began working together to organize the foundation's first official events. David's medical expertise brought new ideas to the table, including health and wellness programs for women entrepreneurs. Emily watched from the sidelines, her frustration growing. David's presence threatened to shift the power dynamics in the house, and she wasn't about to let that happen. One evening, she cornered Henry in the study. "We need to get rid of him," she hissed. Henry sighed. "He's my son. He's a liability," Emily snapped. "And if he stays, you'll lose whatever influence you have left." Henry didn't respond. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The foundation officially opened its doors a month later. The first group of participants, a mix of retired teachers, single mothers, and women looking to start over, arrived at the Belmont mansion with a mix of hope and trepidation. Charlie greeted them warmly, giving each woman a folder containing the program's curriculum. Henry stood at the front of the makeshift classroom, his arms crossed. He had reluctantly agreed to teach the first session, but his disdain was evident. "Let's get one thing straight," he said. "I'm here because I have to be, not because I want to be." The women exchanged glances, unimpressed. Linda Carter, a retired baker, raised her hand. "Good to know, Mr. Belmont. But we're here because we want to be. So maybe let's focus on that." For the first time, Henry felt a small crack in his armor. The west wing of the Belmont mansion had been transformed. Once reserved for grand parties and formal receptions, the space now buzzed with the energy of women eager to rebuild their lives. Fold-out tables replaced polished mahogany, and whiteboards covered walls that once displayed priceless art. Henry Belmont stood at the front of the room, his expression tight as he surveyed the group. The women sat in a semicircle, their notebooks open, their faces reflecting varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. "Business," Henry began, his voice clipped, "is about numbers. You can have all the passion in the world, but if you can't show a profit, you're wasting your time." In the second row, Linda Carter raised her hand. "Mr. Belmont, with all due respect, I don't think the problem is passion. Most of us are here because we've been told we don't have what it takes to succeed. How do you measure that in numbers?" The room grew silent, all eyes on Henry. For a moment he faltered. "That's not the point," he said, his tone defensive. "Success is about results, not feelings." Linda's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "And here I thought business was about people." A ripple of chuckles moved through the room, and Henry felt his control slipping. In the days following the foundation's opening, Charlie found herself working long hours to keep everything running smoothly. Between managing schedules, coordinating with donors, and addressing participants' concerns, she barely had time to sleep. One evening, as she sorted through a stack of paperwork in the study, David appeared in the doorway. "You look exhausted," he said, leaning against the frame. Charlie sighed. "This is nothing compared to what your mother managed. She made it look easy." David stepped inside, his tone softening. She had you, Charlie. You were her rock. Charlie smiled faintly. She was mine, too. David pulled up a chair, rolling up his sleeves. Let me help. They worked in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared grief settling between them like an old, familiar friend. Emily Harper paced the length of her suite, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She had spent weeks trying to undermine Charlie's authority, planting doubts among the staff and participants, but her efforts had been largely ignored. She picked up her phone and dialed Jordan Blake, a rival businessman with a reputation for exploiting opportunities. I have a proposition, she said when he answered. Blake chuckled. This should be interesting. Emily laid out her plan to liquidate some of the foundation's properties in exchange for a hefty payout. Henry doesn't need to know, she added. But Blake wasn't convinced. You're playing a dangerous game, Emily. If this goes south, you'll lose everything. I know what I'm doing, she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Henry's teaching sessions continued, but they remained tense. The women in his class were sharp, unafraid to challenge his opinions, and his patience was wearing thin. During one particularly heated discussion, Gloria Parks, a retired nurse, raised her hand. Mr. Belmont, have you ever failed at something? Henry's jaw tightened. Failure isn't an option in business. Gloria tilted her head. Then how do you learn? The question lingered in the air, and for once, Henry didn't have an answer. David's role in the foundation grew quickly. His background in medicine brought new ideas to the table, including health workshops and wellness programs for the participants. One afternoon, he presented his proposal to Charlie. These women are building businesses, but they also need to take care of themselves, he explained. A lot of them have been through tough time stress, health issues, you name it. We can't ignore that. Charlie nodded. Margaret would have loved this. Let's make it happen. Samuel Reed arrived unannounced one rainy evening. The former business partner Henry had betrayed decades ago. Samuel had been invited by Margaret before her death. Henry opened the door, his face a mixture of shock and apprehension. Samuel, he said stiffly, what brings you here? Samuel stepped inside, shaking the rain from his coat. Margaret. She thought it was time we talked. The tension between them was palpable as they sat in the living room, the crackling fire doing little to warm the air. You destroyed my life, Henry, Samuel said bluntly. Margaret tried to make amends. But this, he gestured to the mansion, this doesn't erase what you did. Henry looked away, his jaw tightening. Why are you here? To see if you're capable of redemption, Samuel said simply. Over the next few weeks, Samuel observed the foundation in action. He met with participants, listened to their stories, and saw the impact Margaret's vision was having on their lives. One afternoon, he approached Henry in the garden. I'll admit, this is more than I expected, Samuel said. Henry glanced at him. It's not enough. Samuel studied him for a moment. No, it's not. But it's a start. Emily's plan to liquidate foundation properties backfired spectacularly. Ethan Ford, the foundation's lawyer, uncovered her scheme and presented the evidence to the board. At an emergency meeting, Emily was confronted. You've jeopardized everything Margaret built, Ethan said sternly. Emily tried to defend herself, but the evidence was damning. She was removed from any decision-making roles and relegated to a mentorship program, a move designed to humble her and force her to face the consequences of her actions. The foundation's first success story came from Linda Carter, whose bakery had grown from a farmer's market stall to a full-fledged business with a loyal customer base. At a networking event, Linda approached Henry with a smile. Believe it or not, you actually helped, she said. Henry raised an eyebrow. How so? You pushed me to think about the numbers, she admitted. And for that, I'm grateful. It was the first genuine compliment Henry had received, and it stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years, pride. As the foundation prepared for its first annual gala, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. The participants were thriving, the staff was energized, and even Henry seemed more engaged. One evening, Charlie found him in the study, poring over a participant's business plan. I didn't think you'd take this seriously, she said. Henry looked up, his expression thoughtful. Neither did I. David Belmont sat at the head of the conference table in the newly renovated west wing of the mansion. Around him, Staff members, participants, and local healthcare providers discussed his latest initiative, a comprehensive wellness program tailored to the foundation's participants. "I want this to be more than just a program," David said, leaning forward. "These women are building businesses and rebuilding their lives. We need to give them tools to stay healthy mind and body." Charlie sat to his right, nodding in agreement. "It's ambitious, but I think Margaret would have loved it." The mention of his mother's name softened David's expression. She believed in taking care of the whole person. "That's what this is about." Across the table, Dr. Fiona West, a local physician, raised her hand. "We could partner with the community clinic for health screenings. Maybe offer counseling services too." David smiled. "Exactly the kind of ideas we need. Let's make it happen." As the meeting adjourned, David caught Charlie's arm. "Thanks for supporting this." "Your mom always said you had her heart," Charlie replied. "Now I see what she meant." Later that week, Henry was invited to give a lecture at a local university. Though he was reluctant, Charlie convinced him it was an opportunity to showcase the foundation's work. Standing before a room of eager students, Henry began with his usual brusque demeanor. "Business is about numbers. Emotions have no place in profit margins," he declared. But as he spoke, something shifted. The students challenged his views, asking about his experience at the foundation. "You've been teaching women who face significant challenges," one student said. "How do you measure their success?" Henry hesitated. "By their growth," he admitted. "By their resilience." The word surprised even him, but the applause that followed was genuine. For the first time, Henry felt a flicker of pride not tied to wealth or status. Emily Harper sat at a small desk in the corner of the mentorship program's workspace. She was no longer the center of attention, and her demotion had left her bitter and humiliated. But as weeks passed, something unexpected happened. One of her mints, Sarah Green, a single mother, approached her with a nervous smile. "Ms. Harper, I wanted to thank you. Your advice on networking helped me land a catering gig. It's small, but it's a start." Emily blinked, taken aback. "You're welcome," she said, her voice softer than usual. For the first time, Emily saw the impact she could have not through manipulation, but through genuine support. Samuel Reed had become a regular presence at the mansion. Though his relationship with Henry remained tense, his respect for the foundation's work grew with each passing day. One afternoon, he approached Charlie with a proposal. "I'd like to donate a portion of my company's profits to the foundation," he said. Margaret believed in redemption. "Maybe it's time I did too." Charlie's eyes widened. "That's incredibly generous, Samuel. Margaret would be proud." As they finalized the details, Samuel glanced toward Henry, who was speaking with a group of participants. "Do you think he's changed?" Charlie hesitated. "Not completely, but he's trying." The foundation's first annual gala was held in the mansion's grand ballroom. The room glittered with crystal chandeliers and fresh roses, a tribute to Margaret's favorite flower. Participants mingled with donors, sharing their stories of growth and success. Linda Carter, now the proud owner of a thriving bakery, gave a heartfelt speech. "This foundation didn't just teach me how to run a business," Linda said, her voice steady. "It taught me to believe in myself again." In the audience, Henry watched with a mixture of pride and humility. For the first time, he understood the depth of Margaret's vision. At the gala's end, David approached Henry, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To Mom," David said, raising his glass. Henry hesitated before clinking his glass against David's. "To Margaret." The moment was small but significant, a step toward reconciliation between father and son. In the weeks following the gala, Emily threw herself into her mentorship work. She began meeting with participants one-on-one, helping them refine their business plans and navigate challenges. During one session, Sarah Green said, "You know, Ms. Harper, you're really good at this. You should run a program of your own." Emily smiled, a flicker of pride warming her chest. For the first time, she felt she was contributing something meaningful. As the foundation prepared to open a second campus in Atlanta, the team faced new challenges. Funding was tight and logistics were complex, but the momentum was undeniable. Charlie, David, and Henry worked late into the nights, finalizing plans and securing partnerships. "This is just the beginning," Charlie said one evening. Henry nodded, his expression determined. Margaret would expect nothing less. Linda's bakery reached a new milestone when her products were picked up by a regional grocery chain. At a celebration in her honor, she hugged Henry and Charlie. "Thank you for believing in me," she said. Henry felt a lump in his throat. "You did this, Linda. We just gave you the tools." At a board meeting, David proposed expanding the wellness program to include mental health services. "We've seen how much these women can accomplish when they're supported," he said. "Let's give them everything they need to succeed." The proposal was unanimously approved, marking another victory for the foundation. Henry Belmont sat in the quiet solitude of Margaret's garden, the envelope Charlie had handed him resting on his lap. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of roses in full bloom. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a letter, its paper slightly yellowed, the words written in Margaret's elegant hand. "Dear Henry, if you're reading this, I am no longer here to tell you these things myself. But you must know, my faith in you never wavered, even when you gave me every reason to lose it. The foundation wasn't just my dream, it was my way of showing you that true success is measured by what we leave behind for others. I've seen glimpses of the man you could be. If you're willing to look beyond yourself, you can become him. This foundation is your chance to start over, not for me, but for yourself. With love, always, Margaret." Henry's vision blurred as he clutched the letter. The weight of his failures bore down on him, but so did the flicker of hope Margaret's words had left behind. The following day, Henry walked into the west wing of the mansion with a determined expression. His students' now familiar faces looked up from their work. "Good morning," he said, his tone softer than they were used to. Linda Carter raised an eyebrow. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Henry replied, pulling a marker from his pocket. "Today, we're going to talk about something I've been avoiding. How to adapt when the numbers don't go your way." The room fell silent as Henry began writing on the whiteboard. For the first time, he shared stories of his own failures not as cautionary tales, but as lessons learned. By the end of the session, the women were leaning forward, engaged in a way Henry hadn't seen before. "Not bad, Mr. Belmont," Linda said as the class ended. "Not bad at all." Emily Harper had been running small mentorship groups for months, but today marked the first time she would present her own program to the Foundation's board. She stood at the head of the table, her hands gripping the edges as she introduced Reclaiming the Ladder, a program designed to help women re-enter the workforce. "This isn't just about resumes and interviews," Emily said, her voice steady. "It's about giving these women the confidence to climb again." The board members exchanged approving glances, and when they voted to approve the program, Emily felt a swell of pride. As she left the meeting, Sarah Green caught up with her. "Congratulations," Sarah said with a smile. "You've come a long way." "So, have you?" Emily replied, genuinely moved. The opening of the Foundation's second campus in Atlanta drew a large crowd. Local leaders, business owners, and participants gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, where David Belmont delivered the keynote address. "This isn't just a building," David said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's a promise to lift up those who've been overlooked, to create opportunities where none existed before, and to honor a woman who believed in the power of second chances." As the ribbon was cut, cheers erupted, and Henry found himself clapping along. For the first time, he felt proud to be part of something greater than himself. Samuel Reed visited the Savannah campus, meeting with participants and staff. After a tour, he sat with Henry in the garden, their relationship still fraught with unresolved tension. "Margaret believed in redemption," Samuel said, breaking the silence. "Do you?" Henry nodded slowly. "I'm trying to." Samuel studied him for a moment before extending a hand. "Then let's start there." The handshake was firm, a small but meaningful step toward forgiveness. One evening, Charlie found Henry in the study, reviewing proposals for a new program. "You've changed," she said, her voice quiet. Henry looked up, surprised. "Have I?" Charlie smiled. "You're becoming the man Margaret always believed you could be." Her words stayed with him long after she left the room. The Foundation celebrated its third anniversary with a gala at the mansion. The event highlighted success stories from participants like Linda Carter, whose bakery now employed 10 women, and Sarah Green, whose catering business had won its first major contract. As Henry mingled with guests, he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known in years. "This is what Margaret wanted," David said, joining him. "She wanted more than this," Henry replied, "and I'm going to make sure she gets it." The following morning, the Margaret Belmont Memorial Garden was unveiled. The roses Margaret had planted herself now framed a stone plaque engraved with her favorite quote, "True wealth is not what we own, but what we share." Henry knelt by the final rose bush, planting it with care. As he worked, he felt a deep sense of connection to Margaret, as if she were there with him, guiding his hands. Months later, Emily's program, Reclaiming the Ladder, had expanded to 3 campuses, and David's wellness initiatives were gaining national attention. Linda Carter was featured in a regional magazine, crediting the foundation for her success. "They didn't just teach me how to run a business," she said. "They gave me back my confidence." Henry read the article with a faint smile. The foundation's 4th year marked its greatest achievement yet, the opening of 5 new campuses across the country. At the inaugural conference for participants and graduates, Henry stood on stage, addressing a crowd of thousands. "This foundation was born from the vision of one extraordinary woman," he said. "But it has grown because of all of you. Margaret's legacy isn't just in these walls, it's in every life we touch." The audience erupted in applause, their faces glowing with hope and pride. As Henry stepped off the stage, David, Charlie, and Emily were waiting. "She'd be proud of you," David said. Henry looked out at the crowd, then at the roses blooming in the garden beyond. "I hope so," he said softly. In that moment, Henry knew Margaret's legacy was not just something he carried, it was something he lived. Years later, the foundation had expanded globally, its graduates numbering in the tens of thousands. In the garden of the Savannah campus, a plaque bore Henry's words, "The greatest thing we can leave behind is the chance for others to thrive." As participants walked among the roses, they carried forward a legacy of hope, resilience, and redemption, proof that second chances could bloom into something extraordinary. If Margaret's story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of second chances, don't forget to hit that like button and share this story with someone who might need inspiration. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of redemption, transformation, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. We believe in the power of storytelling to change lives, just as Margaret Belmont believed in the power of lifting others. So, join us on this journey, and let's grow together, one story at a time.